Thank you all for being here this afternoon, and I am very pleased to be with you today, and we're not going to, at least I won't be addressing you about COVID or winter storms or other disasters. Today we've got good news, and it is a very sound budget that I think we can all be proud of that we're going to be proposing to the legislature next week. And I am joined today by our Commissioner of Administration, Jay Darden, by Commissioner of Higher Education, Kim Hunter-Reed, Secretary of the Louisiana Workforce Commission, Ava Cates, DOTD Secretary, Dr. Sean Wilson, and CPRA Chairman, Chip Klein. I will be making prepared remarks, but if any of you have questions for these individuals, you can ask them once I've completed. So I am here today, in short, to announce a budget plan that invests significantly in education at every level, advances infrastructure projects that, quite frankly, have been on the books for a long time. A lot of people consider them to be pipe dreams. And after nearly 2 years of a pandemic and multiple natural disasters, I believe this budget firmly places our state on track for resurgence. And before I get there, I want to spend just a minute in contrast today with where we were 6 years ago, when we had just come into office and there was $1 billion shortfall just to close out the fiscal year of June 30th of 2016, and a $2 billion budget shortfall for the fiscal year that started on July 1st of 2016. But by working hard, this administration, in coordination with the legislature, we were able to make the very difficult decisions to stabilize our revenue, to start investing again incrementally, modestly in our critical priorities. And then today we have some of the most significant advancements in terms of these investments that we have seen in a very long time here in Louisiana. And in fact, I think we have once in a generation opportunity, maybe once in a lifetime opportunity in some respects to move our state forward. All of our communities, leaving nobody behind. I do want to start with the most important part of the plan. I don't know how many of you listened to the radio show last week, but one of the callers asked me, said, well, you know, for decades, Louisiana has been on the top of too many bad lists and on the bottom of too many good lists. How do we get off the bottom of those lists? And it's a question, you know, that I've had and others have had. But how do we fix it? And it's always overly simplistic to say one thing can do it. But the single most important thing is education, having a better educated citizenry that possesses more credentials and degrees is a way to do this. And whether you're talking about poverty or crime, economic development, jobs, healthcare, education cures a lot of ills. And there have been times in Louisiana where we have invested in education, but it's never been significant as it should be, and it's never been as consistent as it should be. So hopefully we can do better. I think you're going to see that the budget I'm going to talk about here in just a moment is a huge step in that direction, because they include new significant investments at every level of education, from our youngest learners to our college students and to those who teach them. So the budget includes $31.7 million for faculty pay raises in higher education, $10.5 million for the Murphy J. Foster Promise Program, $97.2 million for higher education, which includes $5 million for Title IX offices across the state, full funding for TOPS, $15 million more for GO grants, that's need-based aid for higher education, and $25 million into the Higher Education Initiatives Fund. For early childhood education, my budget proposal includes $43 million, more than 17 of which is for the LA4 Early Childhood Program. And for K through 12, my budget proposal includes $148.4 million for teacher pay raises. For the teacher pay raise, getting to at least the Southern Regional average has been a priority of mine, which is why this is the 7th budget that I have proposed since being governor, and 5 of them have had increases in teacher pay. And we're going to continue to work on it. The funding that I'm talking about today, the $148.4 million, provides for at least a $1,500 pay raise for teachers, $750 for support staff. And because we're not yet at the Southern Regional average, I'd like for it to be higher. And in fact, I think it can be higher when House Bill 1 reaches my desk and I sign it into law. And that is because I expect that the Revenue Estimating Conference, when it meets in May, will recognize additional recurring state general fund. And I'm calling on the legislature to take the first $49 million of that additional recurring state general fund and increase the teacher pay by another $500. So an even $2,000 should that be possible. I believe it will be. If ever there was a time to invest in education, it's now. I think we know how significantly the pandemic has adversely affected education at all levels. We know the burden that's been placed on our teachers and support staff, paraprofessionals, our faculty, and so forth. And so I think we owe it to them. Those professionals in our classes who have stuck with our students, we owe it to them to invest in their future and do better by them. The second most important part of my budget proposal relates to infrastructure. Thanks to the bipartisan infrastructure law, the American Rescue Plan that we continue to have $1.4 billion worth of for inclusion in this year's proposal, surplus from last fiscal year, and excess in the current fiscal year. We're going to invest those dollars in a way that makes projects that have been talked about for a long time a reality. My proposal includes more than $1.1 billion in funding for new critical infrastructure, including $500 million for a new Mississippi River Bridge here in Baton Rouge, $100 million for the I-10 bridge in Lake Charles, and $500 million for water and sewer improvements statewide. This is what it looks like to make the most of the dollars that you have. Many of these projects have been on the books a long time. Some people probably even forgot about them, but not anymore. Some projects, critical projects like the Baton Rouge Bridge and the Lake Charles Bridge, people have given up hope on some of those. This is tangible funding being dedicated to turn what once was a dream into a reality. My proposal also dedicates $550 million in federal American Rescue Plan funding to replenish Louisiana's Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund, which was at a historically high balance going into the pandemic. And you all know what happened to unemployment during the pandemic, especially in 2020, and how that fund evaporated before our eyes. We know that when the REC meets in September, the fund balance there, that determination will decide whether there will be an automatic tax increase on every employer across the state that pays into the fund. I don't think there should be a tax increase of that type, especially since we've been given funds by Congress specifically for COVID-related expenditures. And those funds can be, and I believe should be, put into the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund in the amount necessary to get the balance to at least $750 million, which is what the statutory requirement is in Louisiana to prevent automatic tax increases. Because there's only a couple of options if you don't do that. The tax increase on every employer that I just mentioned. You can reduce the benefits for people who are unemployed. We shouldn't do that. Or you can try to borrow the money from the U.S. Treasury. I think it may be difficult to borrow money from the U.S. Treasury when they've given us ARP funds that we could have used and may not have. And so I don't expect that this is going to be controversial or hard But I believe that the first draw on the American Rescue Plan funds should be an amount of $550 million to shore up the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund. One of the key tenets of this budget, and quite frankly, all of my budgets, is that one-time funding should only be spent on one-time expenditures. We are not going to spend one-time money on recurring expenditures. That was what happened for a long time here, and in fact, the first budget that I inherited, the last 6 months of that budget year, there were more than $800 million in one-time money plugged in for recurring expenditures. That was part of the problem that we had to solve for. We did, and we don't want to create those types of problems again. Finally, I'm always proud of the budget team because they have a difficult job to do under sometimes impossible circumstances. But I'm especially proud of the job that they did this year because working together, I think we created something that we can all be proud of. I know I'm proud of the budget proposal. The people of Louisiana can be proud of this proposal. And I think that it's easily something the legislature can embrace and support. You know, I've always told you, even when we had that $2 billion budget deficit, that I was bullish on our future, that we would get the job done. This really is a manifestation of what that looks like. We're in a much better place because of the hard work that we've done, and I've enjoyed the opportunity to work with the legislature, but particularly with my team as well, in order to advance responsible budgets that would support our critical priorities, and none of them do that better or more significantly than a proposal that I just went over with you. And with that, I will take some questions. Obviously, there will be a more detailed proposal. There'll be a more detailed explanation of the proposal when the Commissioner of Administration presents it to JLCB tomorrow. But we do have the team here to answer questions, and I'll start with any questions that you may have. Yes?
Have you talked to the Senator of House leadership about the $500 million to a bridge that goes to whether they go along with that?
I have talked to a few legislators, including the Senate President. Didn't talk about a specific number because we were still working on what that number would be. But I told him that it was my intention to do something transformational with the one-time money that we had for transportation infrastructure, to include creating a fund that would significantly advance the costs associated with what I believe to be the single most important transportation infrastructure priority in the state of Louisiana, the Baton Rouge Bridge. But I think the way you asked the question is whether I mentioned the $500 million. I don't think that came up because I don't believe we had set the figure at that point.
Can you tell me, or could Jay or could Sean tell me where the $500 million would come from and how?
So the $500 million would come from the current year excess, and it would go into a fund. There are pre-development costs that any project of this nature has. Those can be paid for out of the fund. But secondly, what it will do is it will let the private sector know how serious we are about this bridge, because we see this being a public-private partnership at the end of the day, given the overall price tag. Secondly, or I should say thirdly, it allows the federal government, the U.S. Department of Transportation, to know how significant this project is for us and how serious we are with the funding committed to it, that then makes it more likely to win discretionary grants and other additional funding going forward so that we can deliver this project as soon as possible. But it is not just the most important single infrastructure priority project in the state, it's also the most expensive. And you've got to put money up towards it while you have it. Otherwise, you're never going to complete it. And we actually have the ability to do that now. And so that's why we've chosen to put $500 million into that fund. You want to add anything to that? Come on.
Thank you, Governor. He's just shared billions of reasons why I love being secretary for this guy. What I would tell you, Will, is the department recognizes the need to fund these big infrastructure projects the way they're happening all around the country, and that includes using public-private partnerships. We've not been shy about using this tool that's been on the books for years, as we've used Garvey and others for the first time in the history of Louisiana. And so we're looking at the same delivery for Calcasieu. We're looking at the same delivery for the new Mississippi River Bridge. And we envision using these dollars to do two things. One, remain competitive at the national level because it's proven with the legislature's support for $150 million. We got the second largest discretionary ever. And then two, it's going to be essential as we look to deliver this with a public-private partnership. And we intend to roll out a plan in a few weeks that would allow us to pursue a pre-development agreement to augment the environmental process that's been fully funded by this governor, and that will help us deliver this project. The reality is it's not going to get cheaper. It's going to get exponentially expensive, and having this fund, as well as other funds being used for mega projects, are the best ways to deliver these tools to have to wait on the environmental process as opposed to wait on money to remain competitive. And that's how we've delivered several really big projects, and that's how we're going to deliver other really big projects. And so that's how we intend to use this $500 million in addition to money that we're already spending out of our regular program to fund the different stages that are necessary that had not been completed prior to now.
Just one other thing, just for the sake of conversation, what do you say that the bridge would cost, and are you looking at 10 years to build?
I don't have that crystal ball. What I will tell you is construction inflation runs about 2.5% a year, and that was pre-supply chain issue, pre-inflation, and recognizing that the bridge itself from LA1 to LA30 is going to run upwards of $800 to $900 million in today's dollars. When you add that in 3.5 to 4 years, when we're ready to finalize that procurement, compound the increased cost over those 4 years. Also recognize when the governor says this is the most expensive project, he's also referring to the fact that building just that bridge is not the answer. You've got to get from I-10 on the west side to LA1 to cross the new bridge. And when you get to LA30, you got to get back to I-10 to make it meaningful. We understand traffic patterns, we understand mobility, and we understand the need to get connected. And so if we build just that bridge, we're doing ourselves a disservice. And so we're looking at the full nature of it, but focusing primarily on that most critical piece. And then the last thing I'll say is the legislature was wise in passing the vehicle sales tax, of which this project and the other mega projects that you see prioritized in this fund all will get a pro rata share. The idea that we have to make those changes gives us an opportunity to create the fund that's necessary to protect these funds and really invest it so that we don't lose priority or lose momentum in the future. We want to make sure that these are the projects we've talked about for 20 years actually get done.
You talk about costs going up, and you look down the line in terms of, building a road to lead, say, from Interstate 10 to wherever this bridge is located, and then all the other issues that go with it. How much more do you see that adding to the cost of this project?
You know, it's premature to even estimate that. I can tell you you're looking at least another $200+ million. The reality is, though, we're going to have revenue coming in. We're going to have innovative delivery models that we can run parallel to delivering this infrastructure, delivering the bridge. And so I don't see that as a deterrent. That's the most important thing to tell people. We've got tremendous tools from the federal government, everything from private activity bonds to Garvey funds to TIFIA bonds, things that will help deliver these big projects. And in order to deliver these big projects, you're not going to get $1 billion from the federal government for just one project. So we're going to have to use an all-of-the-above approach, as we've been doing for a number of years in this administration. And we would envision using that same approach to deliver those other elements that are going to be more expensive than the bridge. it makes sense to start with the bridge structure and then augment those others because they could still open simultaneously based on what we need to do to make sure that we connect the road and don't build a bridge to nowhere. Yes, ma'am.
The governor or whoever would like to answer this. I have a couple of questions about the teacher pay raises. Where is that money coming from to afford this? And are you confident that we'll be able to keep this going years down the road as a couple sales tax are set to sunset in a couple of years?
Yes, I am. I wouldn't propose it, and this is a recurring expenditure, and it's coming from recurring revenue with the increase in the forecast for state general fund revenue for next year. It's a function of what the REC met and decided earlier this month. And in terms of that additional state general fund revenue that has been forecast for next year, I believe that the first call on that ought to be teacher pay raise. And so it's fully paid for, it is recurring, and that will obviously continue. And the state of Louisiana will be able to do it. In fact, the state of Louisiana can't afford not to pay our teachers more. We have a real, it's not just in this country. I'm sorry, not just in this state, it's all over the country in terms of teacher shortages. And still the most important part of delivering education is to have a highly motivated, qualified teacher in every classroom with our children. You can't do that if you don't pay competitively. And we have to do that in Louisiana. We have to incentivize more young people to go into education, and once they get there, to stay. If you don't pay teachers more, that just quite simply isn't going to happen. So because of the forecast, the economy is performing well enough, obviously, that the economists looked at what they would expect to happen next year and the amount of revenue to be available to us, and increase that forecast by enough, obviously, that we can afford that $148 million. And I mentioned it earlier, I believe when REC meets in May, that they are likely to increase the forecast yet again. And I would like the first $49 million of that additional forecast to supplement that teacher pay and try to get it to $2,000. I think we're going to be able to do that. That is not, to be very clear, what this proposal is. This proposal is balanced based on the current forecast, and it is for a $1,500 increase. Yes, ma'am.
Governor, we've been mentioning in the healthcare arena, and specifically I wanted to ask if you all are considering increasing the Medicaid reimbursement rates. I think we've heard from a lot of providers in budget hearings recently that is a real struggle for them.
We are. The short answer to your question is yes. And, you know, because of inflation, I can tell you there are a number of services out there that the people of Louisiana, the most vulnerable people in Louisiana, absolutely depend on. And the hourly rate that you have to pay for that caretaker is going to have to go up. Otherwise, people aren't going to be available for that work that is so critically important. So there are increases. And those will be discussed by Commissioner Darden tomorrow, and he can go into more detail with that. One thing I do want to point out is that over the last year plus, we have benefited tremendously from savings in the Medicaid program because of the enhanced FMAP that we have received because of the public health emergency. The budget that I just presented to you is in balance and reflects no additional savings on the Medicaid program because of that enhanced FMAP. So as of July 1st, we anticipate all of those savings to go away, and the budget is still in balance, even while paying critical providers more, that in turn gets paid to those attendants, you know, and so forth. Jay, did you want to? He can go into more detail today, or you can wait till tomorrow. But that is in the budget.
The rate increases are really across the board. ICF, DD raises, and those entities that provide services that keep people out of institutions all were in the need of rate increases, and those rate increases are included. I don't have the specifics on each one. I do have it. I will have it tomorrow, but I don't have it with me right now. But there's significant increases that, again, are going to be recurring expenses with recurring dollars.
you discussed that with legislative leadership at all?
No, I haven't. But obviously, the legislature was very keen on these increases last year, and if you recall, increases came to a certain group of providers and did not go to other providers, and that was something we were very cognizant of. And so the increases we're proposing are across the board, so that everyone who provides these services and otherwise would compete with each other as to the workers are going to get an increase.
Do you know how, I know this is a hard question to answer, but do you know how much we're talking about? Are we talking either in dollars or percentage, how much?
I don't have it, that's what I was talking about. I don't have it with me, but I'll be referring to it tomorrow for sure.
All right, thank you.
And in further answer to your question, I know that Secretary Courtney Phillips has been in conversation with leadership, both Health and Welfare Committee Chairman in House and the Senate, but also the Finance Appropriations and others about the need. And again, this budget proposal in a large way is responsive to what the legislature told us last year they wanted us to do. We're able to do more of it this year. Yes?
Thank you. Obviously, paying teachers more money will help keep teachers that we already have, but do you think that this will be enough to bring in more teachers, new teachers?
Well, I know that anytime that you increase pay, you create more incentive for people to go into that field. You make it more rewarding from a financial perspective. And so you're certainly taking a step in the right direction. I will tell you, there's a lot more that needs to happen around teacher education and preparation and so forth. And quite frankly, while we have the acute teacher shortage, we probably need to do some additional things. And one of the things I've asked my staff to do is look at what barriers are preventing retired teachers who want to come back into the classroom from being able to do so. Because we know that we need more teachers in our classrooms, more teachers with the right education and the experience and so forth. So we know that the teacher pay is incredibly important for all of those reasons. And by the way, what happens at an education institution on a certain campus, it isn't just the teachers. It is, primarily the teachers, but it's the paraprofessionals. It's the counselors and the custodians. Everybody there plays a role in educating our young people, and that's why it includes raise for those individuals as well. Yes, sir.
I want to ask you about coastal restoration projects or any additional funding to meet your climate initiatives board.
Yeah. So and Chip is here, and he can talk because he's got an annual plan with over $1 billion attached to it. I can tell you that we are proposing out of the surplus alone for $150 million to go to CPRA master plan projects. So these are already projects that the legislature has said they agree with. They're incredibly important for us to meet our restoration and protection goals. And these will be the highest priorities projects on the list that are ready to go. And so that's just from the surplus. But he's got a full body of work that is over $1 billion. And so, Chip, why don't you come on up?
Well, while Chip's coming up, Julie, let me answer your question because I didn't think I had this document with me, but I found it. Just so I want to give you this information today since I have it. The rates for long-term personal care services are currently $14 an hour, and the community choice personal assistance service is currently $13 an hour. They'll both be raised to $18.50 an hour.
Well, thank you. As the governor alluded to, this year the coastal program will present to the legislature an annual plan that is $1.3 billion, which is by far the largest investment in the history of the state's coastal program. Over 114 active projects, more projects under construction this year than ever before. And as you've paid attention to any of the social media or recent press reports coming out of the coastal program, it's also going to be the year of the dredge. We will have over 18 large-scale dredging projects underway across South Louisiana, utilizing over 79 million cubic yards of material, which will create over 14,000 acres of new land across South Louisiana. If you recall, back in the previous administration, some of these projects range from several hundred acres of coastal marsh, and we are now at a point in time under Governor Edwards where many of these projects are in excess of 2,000 acres of land per project. So $1.3 billion this year, the majority of which comes from the BP oil spill settlement. About 60% of those dollars are coming from that settlement. And then last week, over $2 billion worth of additional funding will be going to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers for hurricane protection projects, many of which are going to areas that were impacted during Hurricane Ida. So for the first time, over $300 million in federal investments into Morganza to the Gulf, additional dollars going to West Shore Lake Pontchartrain, additional revenues going to the New Orleans to Venice hurricane protection system. So this is a moment in time that we in the coastal program have been waiting for. So significant funding, large-scale coastal protection and restoration projects will be underway this year across South Louisiana.
Thank you. And nobody should doubt the wisdom of these investments, because if you look at the destructive nature of Hurricane Ida, and look, there are many business owners and homeowners whose lives were and are upside down because of it. But the storm surge did not reap the damage, the destruction that it could have because of those investments. And we know that. We didn't have a levee fail anywhere. And so this is incredibly important. And the money actually gets off the coast as well. There's $128 million additional for the Comeet River diversion here in Northeast Baton Rouge Parish. So that's a significant set of investments that Chip just went through, and I think it's continuing evidence that we really do prioritize coastal restoration and protection. You know, we've always talked about a 50-year master plan to invest at least $50 billion. Well, we're on track. I can't tell you that we're going to have it for all 50 years, but while we have it, we're going to make the investments, and they're all going to be based on science. And we're going to do the very best that we can to afford the most protection while we restore our ecosystems. And that benefits us in lots of ways too. Yes, ma'am.
Will your proposal include funds to address the deferred maintenance backlog at public universities in the state?
I apologize. I heard you. I didn't understand you. Do you understand? Oh, deferred maintenance in higher ed? Yes. And so typically, and I don't know that we've ever deviated from this. What we propose doing with surplus dollars are those things that are required. So 25% to the 25% to the rainy day fund, which, by the way, when the 25% goes to the rainy day fund, it'll have more money than it had the day I became governor, despite that huge budget deficit that we talked about a while ago. 10% to the unfunded accrued liability. So that's $174.8 million to the budget stabilization fund, 69.92 to the UAL for our pension systems. And then we take the remainder and we invest them as allowed by the Constitution, and that's why we pick transportation infrastructure projects, we pick coastal restoration and protection projects, and then your question is deferred maintenance. The portion that we are putting towards capital outlay deferred maintenance, 108.89, so basically $109 million. Now, that is all of capital outlay deferred maintenance. How much of that ends up with higher education, which I think may have been the question. I don't know whether...
There is not a specific allocation between general deferred maintenance of state buildings and higher ed, but for the first time, we've asked the institutions of higher education to give us some specific priorities as to what their deferred maintenance problems are, so we can present those to the legislature, recognizing that You never know when something's going to crop up that will surpass those priorities in need, but we want to convince the legislature that this is something we need to heavily invest in right now in order to avoid longer-term costs going forward for institutions of higher education. So we're hopeful that a significant portion of this 109 will go to higher education. It would include all state office buildings as well, but to the extent that we have discretion and they're not earmarks for those particular projects, we're going to lean heavily on higher ed projects, particularly because we're identifying specific ones that have a need right now. And the breakdown between those three that the governor mentioned, usually we try and do it a third, and a third. We had a little bit more of a need in transportation this time in order to make certain that we had full matches for the federal dollars that are available to us. And so it's a little bit heavier toward those projects than an equal split among the three.
And the deferred maintenance, by the way, when you fund it with surplus, you're funding with cash, so you're not having to borrow the money. Because we do fund capital construction and maintenance out of capital outlay as well. But when you do that, typically you're borrowing that money and you're having to pay it back over time with interest. When you can do this up front with surplus, you're doing it with cash and you're saving all of those borrowing costs. And speaking of paying with cash, there's I mentioned this, but we didn't really discuss it. There's some debt that we're paying for too. So, for example, a statutory dedication that came right off the top is the second installment of our match obligation for the hurricane and storm damage risk reduction system in New Orleans. That's $400 million. That is going to be paid. We are going to pay FEMA $135 million that actually we've owed them for quite some time. That was one of the final budget sweeps done by my predecessor when he took money from the Office of Risk Management that was supposed to go to certain hurricane relief work. And so we've got to go back and do that. So one of the things that you should always do when you have surplus and excess is to look at what debts you have out there and get rid of those debts as well. And we're doing that. One more question if you got it. Yes, ma'am.
So the Senate President has said a lot of things about wanting to keep spending under control with an eye towards the roll-off of the sales tax. I was wondering if you think that this budget meets that requirement.
It does. One of the things that I told you was critically important is we actually, in one fell swoop, weaned ourselves off of the enhanced Medicaid FMAP match that we were getting and those savings that we've been getting for over a year now, which are considerable. I think it was about $250 million just this past year alone. And so absolutely. Look, the single most important thing that you can do is always marry up your one-time money with your one-time expenditures. We're doing that. We're looking at the forecast that the economists have for this year. And we also know that there's going to be a tremendous amount of activity that we believe is going to support revenue forecasts that are going to be rather robust going forward as well. When you make the investments that we're talking about making, when you have storm recovery going on and you have private insurance dollars and federal dollars and so forth, all of this produces economic growth. And so we do believe that this is sustainable. Otherwise, we wouldn't be proposing it. Look, I want to thank you again for covering this, and I encourage you to tune in tomorrow so that you can get actually more detail as the commissioner presents our budget proposal to the legislature, obviously in more detail. But I kind of want to finish where we started. I'm proud of this budget. It reflects an awful lot of work, not just this year, but over the previous 6 years. work here within the administration, but also work with the legislature to stabilize the situation here in Louisiana and create these conditions for growth that allow us to make significant new investments in our most critical priorities. Education with the recurring dollars and transportation infrastructure with the non-recurring dollars. And there are other investments as well, and we're going to be going through those in more detail. But that in a nutshell will sum it up. And so this is an exciting time for us in Louisiana. And even as we recover from hurricanes, even as we continue dealing with this pandemic every single day, I am extremely bullish on the future of Louisiana. And I hope that you all are as well. And I think the budget proposal that we just unveiled supports being bullish on the future of Louisiana. So I'm as optimistic now as I have ever been. And I will conclude with this. Christina, do we have another press conference scheduled this week?
Tomorrow, you have human trafficking, and that's up to you.
Okay. If we need to get back with you on COVID or something like that, which obviously remains a very serious situation, we will certainly let you know. Obviously, we were looking to have that Omicron peak. We think we may be there as a state, but not every region. And even once we peaked as a state, the baseline numbers are going to be incredibly high for a number of weeks, meaning there's an awful lot of COVID, there's an awful lot of transmission, a lot of cases and sickness, hospitalizations, and death. But I can tell you, I was very relieved today to find out that over the last 4 days, there's been a net decrease of 240 COVID inpatients across the state of Louisiana. That was very welcome news, and if that continues, then we're all going to be in much better shape. Thank you all, and God bless.